What's up, everybody? Welcome to PixelPlay Sidequests, your bonus content here on the YouTube channel. Adam and Chris here with you. Kaylan still away. We still recorded the exact same day, but one of these days, maybe he'll just randomly show up. I mean, you, Chris, randomly came back at one point for like part of a side quest once, so you know what? It can happen.
That is true. That is true.
But we are going to talk about Shawn Layden's comments that he made at Gamescom Asia when he was talking about essentially that AA is gone and that's a threat to the ecosystem. Well, we'll get into the meats and potatoes of that. So basically, these were the couple of quotes that he said when he was in an interview with Chief Publishing Officer of Raw Fury, Gordon Van Dyke. This is one of the lines he said. He said, "In the gaming business, you have Call of Duty, Grand Theft Auto, indie stuff, but then that middle piece, that middle layer that used to be where Interplay, Gremlin, Ocean, THQ, all those companies made their money, that middle piece is gone. If you can become AAA, you survive, or if you do something interesting in the indie space, you could, but AA is gone, and I think that's a threat to the ecosystem." To which I think most of us quickly said, Baldur's Gate?
Yeah, I feel like there is a lot of AA games that are still coming out and doing well. Like, obviously, they're not going to do as well as AAA. They never did. They weren't always the most popular, just like most indie games don't sell as much as a AAA game does in numbers. But
like, if he's talking that we don't know of as many off the top of our heads, sure, there isn't like that THQ or Neversoft or whatever else. But keep in mind, Activision at one point used to be that. Keep in mind, at one point, EA used to be that. At one point, Ubisoft used to be that. So, it's not necessarily that they're all gone. Let's be honest, they either they became AAA, or they bought up these studios and made them into AAA, or they died. So there's more than what it is, but like the thing is it never has truly gone. And the fact that he says it's gone is kind of funny because, to be honest, AA is also this weird case of like, we don't really agree necessarily on what defines AA either. Because sure. I've got 3 games up on the screen right now, and it's Baldur's Gate, Cult of the Lamb, and It Takes Two. They are all, by many people, considered AA. They are drastically different in what they are.
Yeah. And there could be an argument I could see that people would say Baldur's Gate is AAA, Cult of the Lamb is indie, and It Takes Two is the only AA that's actually listed there.
And it's published by EA, so is it really?
Exactly. So it's a very hard level of game to actually kind of nail down and have a set, these are AA, these are what make it AA.
Yeah, because at this point, our Yakuza game's AA. They might have been at one point, they may not be now, but it's hard to say. To me, I just look at AA as this. It's not a gigantic developer to be AAA, and it's not made by a very small indie team to be indie. It's really that simple to me. There's a lot more that could be considered AA than people think. It's just it really is what hits your definition of being too too obscure, so it's indie, but also it's too big, and maybe especially if it's published by one of the big developers that maybe you don't look at it as being AA either. Because it could, to me, it almost feels like it could be budget as well. There's so many different ways of looking at it. And that's why it also just makes it really hard to believe that AA is in any aspect gone. I think, in fact, it's thriving better than it ever has.
Yeah, I feel like AA has that benefit of not costing AAA. And so if you take RoboCop Rogue City, a game I very much believe is AA.
I know that's one that you were going to be pretty happy with talking about.
Yeah. It's not a game that's going to sell the same as Call of Duty or something, right? It's not an Assassin's Creed, but I imagine the cost to make it was nowhere near like it would cost because the textures weren't perfect. They weren't meant to be. It was that slightly lower budget or slightly lower amount of developers or whatever it is game, but it worked so well and it had such a good charm that AA actually is what made that game so good. If it was AAA, I would argue that RoboCop game would not have been as good. I think that honestly, AA is what I'd like to see more. So I would agree that AA is probably lower than what it was, especially if you look back on the PS2 era. Where PS2, anybody thinking back then, there was a ton of just random AA games because.
But that's also because there weren't a ton of AAA back then either.
Exactly. And it was easier to, well, I don't want to say it was easier to make a game. It's that the games you could make, most were kind of at that level where it was a double A kind of game. They were just 3D platformers and you could make your own and throw it on there and it would probably sell well. Like there wasn't as many of the big, huge AAA budget games. Because that was just the times. That's what the PS2 was like. It was limited in power, people were limited in money, and there was so many different games that it was probably astronomical. Now we're in that same idea, but everybody aimed for that money, went a lot more corporate in the AAA space, obviously. And now that's where they live, and they've pushed anything they had that was double A. Like, I would have not said Just Dance or something was AAA back in the day. Probably is still technically double A, but it's been pushed so hard and made to be this like AAA name, in the gaming space. Baldur's Gate is another one where people probably would associate that with AAA. But the thing is, would you consider Divinity Original Sin 2 to be AAA? Because they're kind of just the same game.
Because like
same
at that
developer.
point, are you making the case that Baldur's Gate 3 is AAA because of its sales now? Because, well, then yeah,
exactly.
Like, you could make that case, but like Larian Studios was not a AAA studio when that game came out by any stretch.
No, exactly. And that's why I use the Divinity Original Sin 2, because it's literally the same game without the IP and the crazy sales. It sold well, don't get me wrong. It's an amazing game that sold very well. But again, still remained in that double A conversation. So just because now a double A game sells like Baldur's Gate, now people see it as a triple A experience. And it's like all they did was sell a lot of games. Would have Witcher 3 really been a triple A game? Because if you look at Witcher 2...
I don't even think I would consider CD Projekt Red to be triple A still.
Exactly. Maybe they're getting there with Cyberpunk and the size of that and the budget and stuff like that. But like really, if you take The Witcher, that is a perfect example of a double A game space making its way into the triple A conversation because it started to sell so well, higher budget, higher sales, higher budget, higher sales, that it may have pushed itself into that AAA space. And again, Baldur's Gate, people just associate that now AAA, possibly. I'm not saying it is, or everybody does, but they may see it that way because, again, it's just the sales. So maybe that's because there seems to be no AA games, because if they sell really well, all of a sudden people are like, oh, look at this AAA game. And it's like, well, that was made by a much smaller studio. Indie, obviously, they keep indie because it's like, a team of 5 people. It would be hard to be like, oh, this is a AAA game. But, they don't have that issue. But I think that's what happens with AA. If RoboCop sold crazy.
You could even make a case there are certain Microsoft games that are like Hi-Fi Rush. I would look at being AA. Even the recently released Hellblade Senua's Sacrifice, or what's the new one?
Senua's Hellblade 2. Senua's Sacrifice?
It is Senua's Sacrifice. But like that to me is still AA. I don't think that's AAA.
No, so it is AA, and it was
even
successful.
In the major developers it is. I think maybe from Sean's perspective, looking at Sony doesn't really do anything AA all that much.
Yeah, they've cut back on the AA. I'd say Nintendo has a bunch of AA games, like their Mario Golf, their that kind of stuff. Like they're good games, they're well made,
but they're not like Mario Odyssey, Breath of the Wild level. Like shit, no, like you could even make a case that Echoes of Wisdom is AA because that's not really a massive budget game.
No, it's not. It's a much lower budget. It's even a different developer that, for the most part, makes only these smaller side games, right? So, I think it's
really just in the eye of the beholder. Like maybe from his perspective, it's just the studios that are producing the highest quality of games are not in his eyes AA, and maybe you could make a case for that, but like. At this point, I think like we as gamers, like even if you just play on PC alone, the AA market is so goddamn huge.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would say it's like if you go on Steam, you're going to find a lot more indie and AA than you're going to find AAA on there. I really think that the numbers don't lie on that. There's so many AA games.
Even as we look at the potential of like what our Game of the Year conversation could be for the Game Awards, like we were talking about Helldivers, which would be AA for sure. You got 2 indies in Balatro and Animal World that could be in there. Like a Dragon Infinite Wealth, you can make a case for being AA. I mean, Echoes of Wisdom, you really can't really consider AA because it's produced by Nintendo, which is one of the big 3. So it's hard to really give that the edge. But like,
yeah,
we're talking about at least half, if not more than half, of all the games being AA or lower this year. And it's like, I don't think it's gone. In fact, it's not even close to gone. I think it's just a guy who is among another list of guys from Sony who are a little bit out of touch with stuff and looking at things from a perspective that is very outdated. I mean, he was talking about like, oh, well, you can't as a AA developer just, be a lesser God of War, to which it's like, yeah, no one's doing that.
Yeah.
It's like, I don't, you must not play AA games because he was like, well, you guys got to try and go and tread new ground and do stuff. I'm like, yeah, that's AA in a nutshell, actually.
Yeah, that's exactly it.
They're doing all the things AAA doesn't.
I'm sure he's looking at AA through nostalgic eyes in the sense of like he's not thinking of AA now.
Like
it's
he's
more
looking at
like
Tony Hawk Pro Skater era.
Yeah, he's looking at like Glover 64 or whatever that glove game was. Like he's looking at like those side games from the smaller studios that were on the big systems, but obviously were much more the B-level side, kind of games that people would get. And I think he's maybe just still thinking about that era because do we have a lot of
Either
those?
that or
No.
the motherfucker needs to just look on Steam for 5 minutes.
Yeah. Yeah. Because like the old AA has oddly enough become the new indie. Because if a 3D platformer comes out made from that looks like an N64 game, which was AA back then, it's being done by an indie developer now because technology, obviously, right? Like it's something that somebody could make cheap. We were just a couple developers. So yeah, that's why I have a feeling that this could also just be through those glasses of like the PS2, PS3 era, whereas AA now does like the RoboCop game does like obviously the graphics aren't the same as like AAA games can get, but it still looks great. It doesn't look like you're taking a hit much to have that game because they were able to pull it off with smaller budget, smaller team, smaller developer, right? So I think that the AA space may look different. Maybe that's another reason he thinks this. But to think that it's just gone is ridiculous. Yeah, like go on PC. Like maybe you're having that issue on consoles. I'm sure they don't sell as well on console. I'm sure RoboCop did really well on PC versus console, but who knows?
Because like immediately thinking of like some of the best ones that we've seen recently, Sea of Stars immediately comes to mind. Hi-Fi Rush immediately comes to mind. Disco Elysium was a mega hit on PC. You're a big one with these ones, A Plague Tale. Like that would also come to mind. And even like I'm trying to think. Like actually, yeah, I would consider a AA like Pal World.
Yeah.
Huge
I
success
100%
story.
would. Yeah. It's funny because most of the AA ones you're mentioning are just Game Pass games. Like a lot of these come direct to Game Pass, which is funny because I'm sure Xbox would be like, "What are you talking about? AA is great." Because
it's like, yeah, it's just padding our library.
Yeah, it's padding their library like all these games, and they're like Plague Tale, like probably one of my greatest game series I think I've like IP I've ever played. And it's only 2 games, but like amazing, and yeah, definitely in the AA space, but better than most AAA games I played in story and storytelling and just the actual like environment that the game takes place in and the game mechanics and just everything.
So I'm going through the Game Awards and seeing any game that I would consider to be AA in the last like few years. So last year, immediately Baldur's Gate 3, which won, and then Alan Wake 2, I would also consider to be part of that. Like I would definitely say that Remedy Entertainment is not AAA, so that would obviously be 2 right there. The year before that, Plague Tale, like we said. I would even say you can make a case Elden Ring is still like From Software is still AA. I don't think they're AAA still. And then you got Stray. I don't know if Xenoblade you could kind of make a case for because it's Nintendo publishing, but it's not them actually making it. So like you could go with that. If you go on to 2021, you got Psychonauts 2. You've got It Takes Two, which won that year. So ironically, the first 3 years that we've gone through, AA games have all taken Game of the Year.
Yeah.
It's not until 2020
100%.
where you get to Last of Us Part 2 where a AAA game actually wins.
Yeah.
And then in that year, you have Hades, which would be the only one I consider to be AA. The rest of them, I would say, are all relatively AAA. 2019, Sekiro won Game of the Year. I would consider that to be AA. Control, also Remedy Entertainment, was made that time. I mean, even Death Stranding, you could kind of say is double A because sure, it's Kojima Productions, but it's not a triple A studio.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then Outer Worlds is Obsidian, which is not triple A. Like they're its own independent studio at that time before Microsoft took them over. 2018, God of War 1, so that's triple A. Was there Celeste is indie? I don't know if I really consider it. No, there's not really double A in that year. And then yeah, like, but like it starts to taper off a little bit after that. But like in the last 5 years, double A is owning it.
Yeah. Yeah, very much so. Yeah, this guy's just out of touch. I think we just got to kind of, I'm sure he didn't mean it maybe as he worded it. Maybe he was like, we need to focus more on double A because triple A is not sustainable. If he said that, I'm in. That's 100%
Yeah, we'd be
what
sitting
I
here
think.
be like, thank you, somebody fucking
Yeah.
gets it.
Yeah, for anybody who's watched this podcast, yeah, we've been screaming this at the screen for a while. So if he said something along those lines, or if that's what he kind of meant, I'd get it.
He did say at some point that, hey, it'd be, you should probably start making games that are more 2 to 3 year development cycles, to which we go, yeah, it's great to have a game that, doesn't cost you a shit ton of money and you can also pump out without having to delay it 3 times.
Yeah, and when it makes 700 million, it's like, it didn't meet expectations. Like, yeah. Okay.
Insert every Square Enix game here.
Oh, yeah.
But yeah, like, I think all in all, like, even if you're just trying to steelman his opinion as best as possible, like, I still think just saying the words double A is gone, even in a hyperbolic sense, it's like, okay, it's not even, like, missing. It's not even, like, floundering. It's not weak. It's honestly possibly at the best it's ever been.
Yeah, like, maybe it's not as much in the news, like gaming news, because AAA always takes over all of that and stuff.
But is that the fall of AA studios, or is that the fall of AAA studios waving so much money from their marketing budgets?
Oh, it's 100% the marketing budget and the amount that they're pushing these games, where the AA doesn't have the money to do that, right? Like RoboCop, I know I keep using his example, but it's just like a very perfect one because it's so new. Like, that was not advertised like crazy. You didn't go into a subway station and the whole wall was one giant billboard for frickin' RoboCop Rogue City. It's mostly word and mouth. It's small ads in very specific areas and then some reviews that come out, right? So yeah, like, if it's because of that, then that's again just him not paying attention to gaming news outside of, the big AAA, flashy news, like, oh, look at this, look at this, look at that, right?
Yeah. I mean, it is what it is. We're just going to happily keep playing the games that we're enjoying there. I mean, the 3 on screen, It Takes Two, Cult of the Lamb, Baldur's Gate 3, even those 3 alone, that's a pretty goddamn excellent lineup. You'll be pretty happy with those. But you guys let us know in the comments below. What do you think? Do you think AA is kind of floundering? Do you think it's gone? I don't think any of us are going to really say that unless you're trolling there, but let us know your thoughts on that. Obviously, here on YouTube, like and subscribe. Keep in mind, we are still trying to hit that 250 subscriber mark there for our serial episode. Maybe that's how we get Kaylan back, and we have to force him to come back for a serial episode.
Yeah, force Kaylan to come back by subscribing so we can do a serial episode and bring him in.
Yeah. But anyways, guys, that'll be it. So keep in touch with us every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. These will always be up Mondays at noon. Main show on Wednesday, and usually the recap when there's news. Obviously, I just put gameplay out last Friday, but keep an eye on those all the time here on the channel. So with that being said, thank you so much for checking us out here. Take care. Bye-bye for now.